After being with the team for years, Marge Schott became the owner of the Cincinnati Reds and had a tenure full of winning and controversy. Not necessarily from her own doing, she helped the Reds win a World Series, but they went no further amidst her cheapness, disdain, and numerous controversies that led to multiple suspensions and an exit from the game. So let's look at baseball's most controversial woman.
Totally sports-esque. Majorly.
Marge Schott was born in 1928 in Cincinnati, Ohio, growing up in a wealthy household. Her father was a great businessman in the lumber industry, and that financial stability meant Marge never had to worry about money, but she was also described as someone who never forgot the working-class roots of her city. She went to Catholic high school and graduated from the University of Cincinnati in 1950, and soon after married Charles Schott, a businessman who worked in the chemical industry. And the marriage was relatively short-lived, as Charles would die young in 1968. But when he passed, Marge inherited millions. And that money, combined with her existing family wealth, gave her the freedom to do something unusual for women of her generation, which is buy into professional sports. By the mid-1980s, Schott was a well-known figure in Cincinnati. She donated to charities, funded hospitals, and was involved in Catholic organizations. But she wanted something bigger in 1981, as she would purchase a minority stake in the Cincinnati Reds. Then in 1984, she became the majority owner, buying controlling interest for about $12 million. And that made her just the second woman in MLB history to be the principal owner. And from the beginning, she promised to run the Reds with a simple family-style approach. Players were expected to act with discipline, employees had to follow rules, while the fans got the benefit of her frugal side, as she famously kept ticket and concession prices at some of the lowest in the league, including $1 hot dogs that under her watch never changed price. But the frugality came with the dark side. She micromanaged expenses to a shocking degree. Players complained about outdated facilities, along with accommodations. Employees said they were sometimes asked to use supplies until they were literally falling apart. And as for scouts, she felt they were completely useless, as in her eyes, they just sit and observe games, which she felt that anyone could do. And she treated the stadium like her personal household. She would drive her modest car despite her wealth, and she often showed up to the ballpark with her St. Bernards. These giant dogs were beloved by her, but players and staff weren't always thrilled about sharing their space with them. More than once, players complained about dog hair, or worse, ending up in the clubhouse. She also had no filter. She called players directly if she didn't like what she saw, she would barge into team meetings, and she sometimes undermined her own GMs by interfering with roster decisions. Some fans liked her hands-on approach, and others thought she was simply meddling. But regardless of opinion, she made herself impossible to ignore. And from the time she first took over as owner in '84, the Reds began trending up. Pete Rose retired from being a player-manager and became just a manager. And under the direction of GM Bill Burgett, the Reds were consistently contenders. Around veterans like Dave Parker and Dave Concepcion, young players led the way. Eric Davis became the first player to hit 50 home runs and steal 35 bases. Chris Sabo won Rookie of the Year in 1988, and John Franco became a four-time All-Star out of the bullpen. And the biggest development came from their young star developing in Barry Larkin. Making his first All-Star team in 1988, he helped the Reds finish second for the fourth straight year. That streak came to an end in '89, as off-field issues involving Pete Rose's banishment from the game after he was found to be betting on games clearly had an effect. And with Rose now gone from the Reds in baseball, Lou Piniella would take the helm. And as Burgess' replacement Murray Cook was replaced by Bob Quinn, he would add Hal Morris, Billy Hatcher, and Randy Myers. And the Reds would shock everyone, with Sabo, Larkin, and Davis leading the way, and the nasty boys on the mound of Rob Dibble, Norm Charlton, and Randy Myers. The Reds won their first 9 games and started 33-12, and they would end up leading the NL West wire to wire, going 91-71 to win the West by 5 games over the Dodgers. And in the NLCS, they would be going up against a familiar foe who was also finally making it back to the postseason. The Reds and Pirates were the only NL teams to win the World Series in the 70s, and the NLCS, they would face 4 times, with the Reds winning the first 3, but losing in '79. And after splitting the first 2, the Reds won the next 2 in Pittsburgh before dropping Game 5. Then back home for Game 6, the Reds took a 7th-inning lead, then a Glenn Bragg's game-saving robbery in the 9th would help the Reds win the first pennant since 1976. No one was as happy as Marge Schott, and the reason was, she was about to make a lot of money. And of course, more interest comes the longer the series goes. So just like Pete Rose, who was placing wagers on this being a long series in prison, she wanted the Reds to lose a few games, which was to be expected, but they refused to lose. Coming in as underdogs against the Oakland A's, who had just won their 3rd straight pennant, before the start of Game 1, Commissioner Faye Vincent and CBS were trying to keep the microphone away from Marge. She already drunkenly said she was dedicating the series to the soldiers in the Middle West, and she wanted a chance to redeem herself. And before the national anthem, she had her chance.
This World Series to our wonderful women and men over in the Far East that are serving us.
Obviously a slip-up, as she meant to say the Middle East. She then went back to her suite with Barbara Bush, and when she was asked when she first got a love of baseball, Marge said she actually hates baseball, and apparently she hated watching the Reds take Game 1. Eric Davis hitting a massive home run in the first, Billy Hatcher began a stretch of recording 7 straight hits, and Jose Rio threw a gem. The headlines reading, Davis stuns Goliath, and they kept stunning. Joe Oliver was the hero in Game 2, hitting a walk-off single in the 10th inning, giving the Reds a 2-0 lead as they were heading to Oakland. And in Game 3 in Oakland, a 7-run third would be enough, as they would win 8-3. One went away from a sweep. Everyone in Cincinnati was thrilled, except for one person. In Game 4 would be a pitching battle between Game 1 starters Dave Stewart and Jose Rio. They scored in the first, and fortune appeared to be on their side, as the Reds unfortunately lost 2 key pieces in Billy Hatcher and Eric Davis. Hatcher needing x-rays after being hit by a pitch, while Davis's injury was more serious. Falling hard on his elbow chasing a fly ball, he would sustain a rib injury and a kidney laceration, and one of Marge's famous cheap stories arose from here. He would require surgery and spent several days in ICU in Oakland. His private flight back to Cincinnati cost $15,000, and he was forced to pay it by himself. It wasn't until the story reached the media and Marge received criticism that she would reimburse him. The injury would have kept Davis from playing at Game 5, but it was not needed. In the 8th inning, the Reds finally got to Dave Stewart. They would load the bases, and they played situational baseball. Glenn Braggs driving in a run on a force out, then Hal Morris drove in the go-ahead run on a sac fly. Randy Myers relieved Jose Rio, who at one point retired 20 straight, and he would get the final 2 outs to win the World Series for the Reds, their 5th and most recent title, one of the biggest upsets in baseball history. Fans and players alike were ecstatic, but the one in charge of it all was not. As mentioned, owners make the most money from the games going past Game 4, and she did not get that. She was so upset that her team decided to win that she refused to pay for any post-game celebration for the team. So the Reds instead celebrate on their own with some hamburgers. Marge's controversies were becoming well known, and as the Reds didn't capitalize more on their success, controversy continued to follow her. By the early 1990s, her off-the-cuff remarks got her in the most trouble. She had a habit of saying things in public that others wouldn't say in private. She was accused of making racist remarks towards black players and staff, including using slurs casually in conversation. In 92, reports surfaced that she expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler, claiming he was good in the beginning before things went wrong. She also allegedly had a swastika armband in her home. MLB launched an investigation, and Commissioner Fay Vincent suspended her for 1 year in 93, banning her from day-to-day operations of the Reds. And after she came back in May of 94, during a speech, she made headlines with a remark about earrings. She said she didn't want her players wearing them because, in her words, only fruits wear earrings. And it wasn't the only time she tried to impose her personal rules on players. For years, the Reds had a strict ban on facial hair, a rule she fiercely defended. In 85, she even tried to recruit Hall of Fame reliever Raleigh Fingers, but only if he shaved his famous handlebar mustache. And Fingers said in response, he would shave his mustache when Marge shaves her St. Bernard. The rule lasts until 1999, when the newly acquired Greg Vaughn finally convinced her to drop the rule, just months before she gave up control of the team. But her interference went far beyond appearance. In 1995, in the middle of the season, she publicly announced that Reds manager Davey Johnson would not be back the following year, no matter how well the team did. The two had many run-ins, but apparently the final straw was that Marge didn't approve of Johnson living with his fiancée before marriage. The Reds ended up winning the division, and the NLDS, they would beat the Dodgers. But after being swept by the Braves, Johnson was gone. And that series win over the Dodgers is still their most recent postseason series win. Then came a dark moment in baseball that the Reds were a part of. On opening day 1996, the Reds had the honor of hosting the first game of the season against the Montreal Expos, and the weather was freezing. And just after the game began, home plate umpire John McSherry suddenly called time, and he staggered backwards. He then collapsed on the field, and he later died of a massive heart attack. The game was postponed, but Marge's reaction drew outrage. On camera, she was visibly upset about the cancellation, reportedly saying, "There was snow this morning, and now this. I don't believe it. I feel cheated. This isn't supposed to happen to us. Not in Cincinnati." She insisted later that she was just standing up for the fans, but many felt her comments were inappropriate, especially with those who were grieving. And she made matters worse when she re-gifted a bouquet of flowers given to her by the Reds TV affiliate, complete with a recycled sympathy note that she sent to McSherry. And when the umpires returned from the next homestand, she tried to apologize, but it was not accepted by the crew. And then there were offhand comments that showed how out of touch she could be. On a flight, she was introduced to a woman who proudly told her she was the granddaughter of Ed Roush, a Hall of Famer and a Reds legend. And in response, Marge said, "That's nice, hun. What business is he in?" These moments all piled up, and they really shaped her reputation. Sports Illustrated would dub her the Red Menace. And by '96, the pressure was too much. She was suspended once again, this time for 2 years, after repeating her praise of Hitler. The league then made it clear her presence was damaging baseball's image. And during these suspensions, the Reds were run by other executives. And when she tried to return, she found herself increasingly isolated. Other owners wanted her gone, players didn't want to play for her, and fans were embarrassed. On April 20th, 1999, she agreed to sell her controlling interest in the Reds for $67 million. At the time, she was facing a third suspension, failing health, and an expiring ownership agreement with her partners who were limited. The deal was later approved on September 15th, and she remained as a minority partner. After selling the Reds, she lived quietly in Cincinnati. She would continue to donate to charities, and amidst her health problems, she passed away in 2004 at the age of 75. So the question is, how is she remembered? On one hand, she broke barriers and was one of the most powerful women in sports during her time. She owned a World Series winning team, and something needed now, though players didn't love it, she kept baseball affordable for families. But on the other hand, she consistently undermined herself. Her bigotry and offensive remarks overshadowed her achievements. Achievements that could have been more if she invested in what was clearly a great team that could have done even more. She was suspended twice, disgraced publicly, and forced out of the sport she claimed to love. Even in Cincinnati, opinions remain divided. Some remember her as a character, eccentric, cheap, and stubborn, but ultimately committed to the Reds, while others see her as an embarrassment who tarnished the image of the team. And that ultimately is what she will be remembered for. She was a pioneering woman in baseball, but also a deeply flawed person who is prejudiced to find her in the public eye. Hopefully you liked this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.